Death Note, a show that is widely accepted to be one of the greatest anime ever made, and oftentimes is the show that introduces people to the medium. Despite airing in 2007, it is easily among the most often talked about shows even years later. There are hundreds of videos discussing everything from the characters to the psychology, symbolism, and even dissecting the openings of the show, but there's one video that nobody has made yet, a definitive ranking of every Kira in Death Note. Before we start ranking them, there's a few guidelines so it all makes sense. For starters, by Kira, I mean anyone who had ownership of a notebook throughout the series. It doesn't matter for how long or what they did with it, if they owned it, then they were Kira. Secondly, I rewatched and read all of the content for this video in like a week, so I'll be going over just the anime and the manga canons as to avoid to have to sit through the horrors of the Netflix movie again. This will include both one-shots, which are canon to the main story's timeline. So, what am I ranking these Kiras on? It's going to be a combination of raw intellect, decision-making, kill count, ability to go unnoticed, and finally there will be a hefty penalty for every mistake they made and the severity of those mistakes. There will be spoilers, of course, so starting from the worst and going to the best, let's go. In 8th place and dead last, we have Mafia Man Jack Nalon, who possessed Sido's Death Note after stealing it from the task force at the start of the second half of the show. Jack was never really the owner, as he just followed the boss and Mello's orders, but he was the one with ownership. Although it wasn't shown in the anime, Jack made the eye deal with Sido under the threat of being immediately shot. It's reasonable to assume that Jack is responsible for the deaths of the SPK members, but that's about it. In 7th place, we have C. Kira, the star of the 2013 manga one-shot commonly known to fans as Chapter 109. C. Kira was given a death note by Midora in an attempt to mimic Ryuk's previous outing. C. Kira was a weeb who targeted the terminally ill and elderly, but eventually started killing younger people who also wanted to die, so he would wreak some serious havoc if he was let loose in 2021. However, Nier went on the news and called him a murderer, and he got sad and killed himself, despite there being not a single clue leading to his identity, so we gotta put him pretty low down. Next up is Soichiro Yagami, Light's dad. He owned the Death Note that was in the possession of the Japanese task force, and he made the eye deal in order to raid Mello's base. There's a couple of reasons why he can't be higher than this. He's not super smart, he only ever made one big leap in the investigation. He froze like a deer in the headlights when given the chance to kill Mello, and he never really did anything with the book besides falsely claiming that Light wasn't Kira in the presence of the only people that suspected him of being Kira. There is one factor that I'll mention later on in this video that puts him above the other two I've listed so far. So considering the fact that he achieved literally the exact opposite of the goal he dedicated his life to and only managed to save one person in exchange for half his lifespan, the deputy director was a pretty ineffective Kira, to say the least. Now we get into the people who actually did something with the book, and I'll have a bit more to say about them. For our first actual Kira, we have Kyosuke Higuchi of the Yotsuba group. Higuchi obtained the Death Note from Rem, and she ordered him to use it to kill criminals, but he also used it to kill rival businessmen while surrounding himself with a council of other high-ranking Yotsuba prospects. He went as far as to include a member in this council who was less civilized and more greedy than himself to act as a red herring if anyone were to try to guess which member was responsible. As for an actual ranking, Higuchi was not overly intelligent, and his decision-making is hardly a factor as he outsourced this to 7 other people, most of which he probably deemed more capable than himself. Higuchi's greatest mistakes were both being blatant in killing with his lust for power and straight up telling Misa that he was Kira with a lust for, ultimately, he was a fine Kira. He reigned for a few months without being contested, and he made a lot of money doing so. I could see a world where Higuchi was able to do what he did for a lifetime and prosper. However, that world isn't one with L and Light both working together to track him down. Just short of the top 3, we have Teru Mikami, referred to by Nier as ex-Kira. Mikami was a Kira worshipper who was handpicked by Light for his cool head and similar philosophy. Mikami's ideology lined up almost exactly with Light's, except for the fact that he eventually made the decision to also kill lazy people who didn't contribute their best. Shit, when was my last upload again? Yikes. Anyways, Mikami was highly intelligent and filled a page a day for his entire time as Kira. He was ruthlessly efficient and made plays with zero contact with Light that were either as optimal or more so than the plays Light himself would have made. Mikami is shy of the top 3 because of his point deductions for errors. He made very few mistakes of his own as he saw Light as a literal deity and followed his instructions exactly, except when he didn't. As most of us know and a lot of us aren't very happy about, Light's ultimate downfall came at the hands of Mikami making a decision directly against the orders given to him by Light. killing Kiyomi Takeda via fire on the same day Light did, thus breaking his incredibly meticulous schedule. There's a lot of theories floating around about the suspect nature of Mikami's death, some suggesting that Nier used the real stolen Death Note to kill him, but I don't think it fits. His dedication to Light and frustration that his own decision was the ultimate downfall of the one he saw as God would easily be enough to draw him to suicide. But 4th place isn't bad, and admit it, you thought the super stylized delete scenes were sick the first time you watched them. With Mikami at 4th, now we move into the top 3. I bet you guys didn't see this one coming. Misa Amane. But Misa is stupid, I hear you cry. No, she isn't. Throughout the entire show, Light never refers to Misa as stupid, aside from saying Misa you idiot in his head when she makes a decision that isn't as rational or well thought out as his own. But Light is probably the second smartest person on the planet, and he thinks the same about a bunch of characters throughout the series. Light specifically refers to Misa as impulsive, not stupid. Misa makes a lot of really smart decisions early on with her messages sent to Sakura TV to mask her true intentions and make them undecipherable to anyone besides Light. She also had the foresight to have the DNA evidence on them not lead back to her directly. After she made contact with Light, every decision she made from then on came directly from Light, except for one. Sound familiar? She follows a very similar structure to Mikami, but she's above him for the reason that her decision made without Light's oversight was taking the ideal for a second time with the intent to kill L. While Light initially scolds her, this decision was beneficial to the both of them regardless. Not to mention, by the rules presented in the universe, Misa's lifespan has had 2 Shinigami's lifespans added on top of it. Assuming Shinigami don't let their lifespans dwindle to the double digits, she could be nigh immortal, at least by human standards, even with her lifespan being cut in half twice. In the end of the series, and I believe via the word of the creator, Misa killed herself after hearing of Light's death. But in my headcanon, she is an eternal being with a 4,000-year lifespan. Looking strictly at her accomplishments, she acted as Kira for years, almost as long as Light. She was a suspect and directly detained because of it, and still got out of that situation. Sure, it was Light's plan, but it was ultimately still Misa's decision to listen. In the second half of the series, Nier immediately suspects Light again, but suspicion is never placed on Misa. She was detained for 3 days before the finale, but she was released to the public immediately after. Misa is a highly underrated Kira, and people are way too hard on her. I was honestly going to put her above Light, but after mulling it over for a couple days, I decided that Light edges her out slightly. It's very, very slight though. If Misa is only slightly behind Light, that must mean... Yep, in second place we have the OG Kira himself, Light Yagami. You saw it in the thumbnail, and no, it was not clickbait. I think Light is only the second best person to ever own a Death Note. Honestly, he's the third best. Misa should be here instead. Okay. Let me explain myself before you crucify me, please. Light is crazy smart. Like I said, he's probably right behind L in terms of raw IQ. If not ahead of him, honestly. But I've seen video after video showcasing Light's true biggest mistake, each one pointing to a different pivotal moment in the series. All of them are wrong, by the way. Light's biggest mistake in the entire series wasn't some accidental misstep or irrational egomaniacal decision. Light's biggest mistake was in the 3rd episode, when he intentionally made the decision to give the police, and therefore L, the knowledge that he had a connection to the police. Combining that with the fact that they already suspected a student, he actively chose to tell L, "Hey there, L, I'm a student-aged relative of a high-ranking police officer. Also, I'm located in the Kanto region of Japan." Narrowing it down from about 43.3 million to like 200, with the intention of getting closer to L to eliminate him. The issue with this decision, and many of Light's other decisions as the series progresses, is that they are needless. His ego over being able to outsmart people makes him compulsively challenge them head-on, while drawing more and more attention to himself, when if he just ignored the people chasing him, he would have remained virtually uncatchable forever. More importantly, Light was Japan's top student, and was 100% going to go into the police force, and if he simply carried out that path without becoming a suspect, he still would have been immediately drafted onto the Kira task force, and could have gotten close to L that way. These type of ego-driven decisions and running headfirst into adversity are why I initially wanted to rank Misa above him, as she never does anything like this. Misa's motive was always just Light, while his motive is proving to the world and ultimately himself that he's a god amongst men. I've watched Death Note like 20-odd sometimes, and from the first time I watched it and every time thereafter, I've always been Team Light. But watching it through again to make this video, critically paying attention to every detail and every mistake Light makes with the thought of making this video ahead of time, I shifted sides to Team L. For the sake of compelling storytelling, L never misplays. Whenever Light makes a mistake, L perfectly deduces why and gets closer to the truth from it. To a lesser extent, this is also true of Nier and Mello. And finally, we can't talk about Light without talking about the mistake that led to his defeat, trusting Mikami to be his right hand. As loyal and perfect as Mikami seemed for the job, he isn't Light, nor is he a mind reader. As smart as Light is, he uncharacteristically expected Mikami to be on his level, and that caused his endgame to crumble. While it's pretty sad that the ending is out of Light's control and directly opposed to what he intended, he wove his own fate by crafting a plan that by nature was out of his control. I've seen some people say that Light had Gohan syndrome, and without L's presence for 5 years, he became rusty at coming up with these plans, and I couldn't agree more. Time skip Light, in contrast to the first 25 episodes, seemed hasty, overconfident, and even more arrogant. Looking at the big picture, I've come to appreciate the ending of the series, and Light's character arc. The OG, the one who started it all, but not the best, Light Yagami. And finally, the number one best Kira of all time, Minoru Tanaka. Now, my explanation of why Light is in second did not come to an end with just his entry, as I need to explain how and why I could ever rate anyone above him, and why Minoru specifically. For those of you who don't know, Minoru, otherwise known as Akira, was the star of the 2019 manga one-shot, and the story takes place in the same time frame as the manga's release. Here's a short summary of the story. In 2017, Ryuk decides to find a human as similar to Light as possible for the sole purpose of having a long-lasting source of apples. Ryuk comes to the conclusion that the best way to do this is to listen to some teacher conference and then go hand the murder notebook to whoever had the highest scores on an IQ test, and that turned out to be Minoru. Minoru freaks out and tells Ryuk that he isn't even smart, he just plays IQ test games on his phone a lot, and he's failing all of his classes. Ryuk doesn't care, and Minoru says, fine, I'll use it, but not how Light did, because technology is crazy now, and it would never work. So please bring the notebook back to me in 2 years. When he returns with the notebook in 2 years, Minoru has crafted a plan to sell it via Twitter. He sends Ryuk over to Sakura TV to advertise the sale on a live broadcast, so it would be entirely untraceable back to him. Eventually, China and the United States get into a bid war, and it ends with literally Donald Trump, no joke, buying it and depositing the end price of 10 trillion USD, split evenly between everyone with a Yotsuba bank account who is younger than 60 years old, including Minoru. The Shinigami King gets word of this and then gets mad and makes a rule where Death Notes cannot be sold in the human world, and anyone who buys it dies upon receiving it, and anyone who sells one dies upon receiving the money. Ryuk intentionally does not tell Minoru about this, and the story ends with him dying of a heart attack at an ATM. Compared directly to the C Kira one-shot, this is a much better story. But how does this make Minoru the best Kira to ever do it? Well, for starters, he achieved an economic boom across the entirety of Japan, increasing the quality of life for everyone there without ever writing a name. Secondly, his plan was flawless and so impossible to trace that even Nier gave up almost immediately. Lastly is the implications of the fact that he never wrote down a name. And here's why Light's dad wasn't in last place. There are 2 rules in the Death Note that directly contradict each other, and they've always bothered me. The first rule is stated pretty early on, and that is, any human who writes in this notebook can neither go to heaven nor hell. The second rule, which is shown after the time skip, is all humans who die go to Mu, or nothingness. Now, what bothered me about this is why would Ryuk specifically go out of his way to mention a difference in afterlife between those who have used the notebook and those who have not? I personally believe that heaven and hell are actual things in this universe, and the contradiction that came later probably implies that Mu is the place where Death Note users go. By extension, naturally this means that only Minoru and Light's dad could go to heaven out of anyone on this list. So, combining his eternal reward of being within the pearly gates with his gift to Japan and savior-like reputation, Minoru is basically Death Note Jesus. It's also not just a factor of how good Minoru is, but also how bad Light was. Light made so many mistakes, it was hard to keep track of them all, where Minoru made none and was killed simply for the sake of plot and to keep this story self-contained. And that wraps up my ranking of every Kira in Death Note. Now I know this video is not the common opinion, and that's why I was so excited to make it. I love this show, and I always have, and to this day I love talking about it. If you disagree with any opinion in this video, I want you to leave your thoughts down in the comments below, and we could get a real good discussion going on. Thank you for watching.